says case studies that he discusses are more important than anything else, where you can really start to understand why he believes the way he does, why he teaches what he teaches. And so in this last example, the real estate person had been working this sale for months, and like he said, then when he met with him again to try to wrap it up, they had brought another real estate person in with the idea that possibly the other real estate person would obviously take over the negotiations. And so it was only then that the real estate person who had been taking a course from Dr. Covey decided to try this and to try to really listen and asked him this is what I understand that you need. This is what I understand are your concerns. And he got corrected, and he had his the person was able to explain to him more fully what he wanted, what he needed. And after doing that, after just 15 minutes of discussion, he gave him the deal. After months of trying, he gave him the deal, and the other real estate person was out the door. So it is extremely disarming to have somebody actually just listen to you. The comparison that is made a lot in this in the discussion of seeking first to understand, then to be understood, is to compare it to a doctor. I've had doctors that have come in for like 2 minutes and immediately diagnosed and walked out again. I did not feel like they really understood what the ailments were, that they had not diagnosed properly before they prescribed the solution. And Dr. Covey is saying basically this is what we need to be as we talk to other people, as we consult with other people, as we negotiate whatever. We need to first be the doctor who diagnoses, who listens. I happen to have a doctor that I've been with for 30 years in America. I was doing that calculation the other day, and I was quite surprised how long it had been. He comes in with his computer, and he spends a half an hour every time I go in every year. And if I happen once in a while, I go in twice a year. He comes in with his computer and spends 30 minutes asking me questions and updating the information. But he has all the information from years, from decades, literally decades there in front of him. And he adds to it. He goes ahead and adds more, the additional information, updating the information and so forth. Do you think I have confidence in him? Obviously I do. He does apply this principle. Seek first to understand, and then am I ready to listen to him? Do I take his advice, his prescription seriously? Clearly I do. He's taken the time to listen to me. And so what Dr. Covey is saying is we need to do the same thing. If it's a real estate deal, as the example in the video, or we have a disagreement with a spouse or a child, it doesn't matter the setting. If you seek first to understand, it disarms them. It brings down any sense of the emotion that can get into some of these conversations. And if you let them talk long enough, if they totally feel like you have understood them, then they actually will want you to talk. They will ask you to talk. And so no longer it's competition for attention. You have given them, that person, your full attention. You've understood, and as the real estate person did, you've actually then you've shown them you understood by repeating back, this is what I understand you're saying. This is how you feel. And sometimes it's not just understanding. Sometimes it's just feeling. This is how, as I understand it, right, this is how you're feeling. Or this is how, what you're thinking. It depends on the situation. Sometimes feeling is more important than thinking. Because especially if it's emotional, then there's a feeling there that goes beyond, some cases, beyond logic. You may think this is totally illogical. But nonetheless, somebody's feeling that way, and if you can help them understand that you understand their feelings, not just their thinking, but their feelings. Now, after you've spent this time with them, then typically they're ready then to listen to you. And even then, when it's your turn, it should be from the perspective that you really do understand. You really did understand their concerns, and now we start getting to the seeking win-win. That was, in some ways, I think Dr. Covey mixed up these habits wrong. I think number 5 should be number 4. Before you can think win-win, or before you can achieve win-win, let me put it that way, before you can achieve win-win, you first have to understand where the other person is coming from. And so if I, especially the more I think about it, the more I read it, the more I listen to different, I have a number of DVDs and stuff from Dr. Covey. The more I've listened to him, the more I think that habit 5, even though the 3 interpersonal habits are all intertwined, as we talked about last week, I think the most fundamental is number 5. Is that if once you've understood once you've understood what somebody else is saying, now you're capable of seeking a win-win solution. Now you're capable of seeking that third option. One of the things that our presentation group today may be talking about with the 3rd chapter of the College Success book is that sometimes we get trapped in kind of some false narrative, some false logic. And one of those is the idea of a false dichotomy, that there are only 2 choices, your choice and my choice. But what Dr. Covey is saying is, no, there's never just a dichotomy. There's always a 3rd option, or 4th option, 5th option, 6th option. And there are more options, but he just calls it the 3rd option. Because typically 2 parties come together, they begin negotiating, begin arguing, begin whatever it is, they begin communicating, and they only see 2 options, my option and your option. Whereas the seeking win-win solutions is to look probably at a 3rd option. In most cases, you at least have to be open to the idea that neither of you are right, that there is a 3rd option. And so as you're listening and seeking to understand the other person, that's part of what you're thinking about. Is now I really understand where they're coming from. Now I understand their needs. Now I understand their emotions behind it. Now I understand their objectives. I know my objectives. I know my concerns. Now, is there, first off, maybe their idea is better than mine. Maybe I just simply agree that their proposal is better. But very frequently, the option is the 3rd option. These are their concerns. These are my concerns. How do we meet both concerns? How do we achieve the win-win? And so I think this habit 5, in many ways, should be before the win-win option. And then the 3rd one probably is in the right position because as you, again, listen and understand where they're coming from, and as you consider yours, that achieving that 3rd option is where you start synergizing. This is where the whole becomes greater than the parts. I had this part, you had this part. I had this perspective, you had that perspective. And we bring them together and we say, now we have more of a 3-dimensional perspective of this. Now we can look for the 3rd option. We can synergize, we can brainstorm, we can achieve something greater than what either one of us expected. So it's, I think that idea, I hadn't really thought about it before, but this idea that if you, a couple of years ago, I actually kind of lost a good portion of my sight in my left eye. It was because of a bad doctor, actually, who did not listen. He had been told by another doctor that I'd had a detached retina in my left eye. And in order to reattach the retina, they have to take out the natural fluids inside your eyeball and put in a silicone gel to make it harder so that they can reattach that retina. But if they get too much and it has too much pressure, it can blind you. And so I was seeing another doctor about an infection and stuff, and she was kind of tracking and taking pressure, the eye pressure, multiple times over a couple of week period. And she noted that the pressure was high and that I was losing, that the third week that I saw her, I could not see as well as the first week I saw her. And so she immediately wrote a note to the surgeon, said, "You need to get the silicone gel out of there. He's going blind." And I went back to the surgeon. He looked at that and said, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm the one with the big degrees. I'm the one with the international training. He took it totally unseriously, and then had the gall a month later when he finally did take out the silicone gel of saying, "Oh, I did everything perfectly. I don't know what went wrong." I could have sued, but I have a life to live and don't want to spend my time in a courtroom. And in Kazakhstan, I probably wouldn't have made much money anyway. So I'm blind because exactly the situation in a medical sense that Dr. Covey is talking about, of somebody not diagnosing properly and not therefore prescribing properly. What I was going to say to you, though, is that when you are only seeing from one eye, and I still have I have peripheral vision, so I'm not that bad, but I've come to understand if you just cover one eye even, you start losing some of your three-dimension understanding, your three-dimensional sight. You might take a misstep on a stairway, for example, because your eyes work together to create the three dimensions. So in a very real way, in seeking to understand, you're giving yourself a third dimension. So you're not only seeking a third option, you're giving yourself a third dimension by having two perspectives. And so that's important. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and have the student team come up. Before they do, I'm going to pass this list around of your assignments. And over on the right side, you see in red pen, it says week, and then it has 6, 7, 8, 9, and so forth. That's the week in which you will present. And so, of course, this week is Chapter 3, Group 3, and Chapter 3. When you get back from your break, Group 4 just by themselves that week, and week, what I consider week 9. I'm not counting the fall break as a week. And so, and then Team 5 will be the next week. But then, in week 11, there will be 2 presentations. I'll need you to keep those kind of tight. Definitely don't go over 30 minutes of things. Okay, especially once we get two teams presenting, because that still takes half of our period. So for those who are in Team 6 and beyond, 30 minutes will be the max, so that we can keep it under an hour and still have time to discuss whatever it is. However, we will, about that time, we'll also be coming to the conclusion of the 7 habits and be going into other topics, critical topics anyway. Anyway, I'll pass this around so you can double check when your week is, and so you can be prepared. Okay, so would Team 3 come on up and go ahead and load up your PowerPoint? I'll put the...
Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk about Chapter 3, Thinking About Thought. I am Xiamen, and they are my group members, Xingxuan, Cindy, and Jessie. Why we choose this topic? First is to understand what makes thinking in college different from thinking in high school. And learning how to think, knowing the types of thinking, recognizing why all types of thinking are important, understanding what critical thinking is, developing creative thinking habits, and how to solve problems. We make the case that college is really quite different from high school. The social life is different, and there are different pressure in college, perhaps a family to support or a job schedule to coordinate with studies. but the two most fundamental differences involve expectation. The first is the expectation that you will be independent, and the second is the responsibility for your action and the expectation that you will think for yourself. The difference between high school and college talk. In high school, most of it was recalling facts or information you had previously committed to memory. In some courses, you were asked to support a statement or hypothesis using content from your textbook or class. But your thinking in high school was very structured and tied closely to reflecting what was taught in class. In college, you are expected to think for yourself, to assess and evaluate new approach and ideas to contribute your knowledge base and develop or create new fresh ideas. Your instructional roles will be not only to supply a base or new information and ideas, as good instructor will challenge you to stretch your skill and knowledge base through critical and creative thinking. Now I would like to pass to Xing.
Good morning, everyone. So now I'm going to talk about types of thinking.
So as you prepare your presentations, think about that. Think about what people can really help people long term. There's a lot of great stuff in this chapter, and the group covered it all. And you maybe too much, basically. I could see just the last slide first off had an awful lot in one slide, by the way. Some of the slides were too word heavy. Fewer words would be better. But the last slide could have almost been the first slide. You could have almost said, given the kind of like in a journalism story, or like, you give the best at the start. So that last slide could have kind of opened, or at least the content of that last slide could have explained, these are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about critical thinking, creative thinking, and problem solving. And then just cover those three areas. Bam, bam, bam. Forget about how high school or how university is different than high school. Drop some of that stuff out. Find the meat of the chapter and really give it emphasis. And that you'd be much more effective in doing that, and people would remember it better. And that's the key. There's no point teaching if people don't remember what we're teaching. So go for understanding and try to use those principles that I've taught. Define, yes, but then illustrate, compare, and contrast where appropriate. A couple of other thoughts I had on it, though. There are lots of opportunities, and again, this goes back kind of covering or kind of relating to Dr. Covey. The team talked about kind of synthesizing ideas, old ideas with new ideas, coming up with new ideas. This is basically what Dr. Covey's saying in part of his in seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Is a critical part of this is coming up with new ideas as a result of it, as a result of listening and considering more information that you didn't have before, because now you're listening better. Now you can hopefully achieve something new. It may be through synthesizing different ideas. That may be synthesis has the same beginning as synergy. Synthesis, synergy. So as you get new ideas, you can start combining them, but synergy is the next step. It's kind of like synthesis and energy. You can somehow bring together, you synthesize, and then you create some new energy out of it and come up with something new. It may be part of one of the concepts that I do love is the aha concept. It is something that is kind of cool. I love aha experiences. To me, that's one reason why, again, they mentioned it, why you should be curious about stuff. I read a lot and watch a lot about quantum physics, because that's one of the areas with some of the greatest ahas right now. I'm not a quantum physicist, But there's stuff going on in quantum physics that is just mind-boggling. And in some cases, it's not an aha, it's a, what? It doesn't make any sense even. They're coming up with stuff in quantum physics that makes no sense to the human mind. So it's kind of the opposite of aha, whatever. But nonetheless, it makes your mind work, and it gives it energy to come up with and trying to make sense of it all. I'm sorry, I forget his name now, but a couple of weeks ago, this Malaysian billionaire came that spoke to us and has written books about kind of parallels with Dr. Covey's. And some of it is about habits, how to organize your life, how to achieve the most, how to be unique. His favorite word is unique. One of the things he does, he goes through about 8 to 10 books a month, but he doesn't really read them. What he's trying to do is get the key concepts out of each of them. And so he skims them. He may read portions when he sees something that really attracts his attention. He reads that. But he's looking for ideas. He's looking for aha experiences. And so he goes through 8 to 10 books a month, looking for ahas, looking for stuff he can grab onto and utilize in his life. And that's more or less what this chapter is saying, is look for ahas, look for new understanding, look for new ideas. One of the things I teach in my other class, my communication classes, all of them I suppose, but right now I'm teaching the history of media, is if you look at the history of mankind, it is seldom the person who invented something that benefits from it directly, financially. Almost never. For example, an example that I use with them is the creator of the bread slicer. You think that's pretty? First off, how significant is it? But somebody creates a machine that will slice bread automatically. And yet it was 30 years before anybody made any money off of it. He tried to. He never could figure out how to make money off it. People didn't care about slicing their bread. And so 30 years later, a company called Wonder Bread came along. And ironically, it was in the very depth of the Great Depression in America. 1933, 1934, the very worst part of the Great Depression. And Wonder Bread came up with a formula to how to market sliced bread. And within 3 years, most everybody in America was now using sliced bread. It went from basically nobody to most everybody, because somebody figured out how to market it. So marketing became an important part. They also made a few twists to it. They put some vitamins in the bread. They made it different in some other ways. But that's what happens with many innovations, is that you have somebody who has the technical skill, and they come up with the original idea, and then somebody else figures out how to implement it. That's kind of again, part of this creative process. We see the technology. Now, what do we do with it? One guy was saying that until something becomes boring, a technology becomes boring, it doesn't become interesting. In other words, the application of it doesn't become interesting. You have to become used to the technology before you can figure out how to use it. And that's true, for example, of the Internet. The Internet, we had the Internet quite a while. We're speeding up our time of innovative time frames nowadays. But we had the Internet quite a while before anybody figured out how to really make money off of it. And then suddenly, in a fairly quick period of time, in the early 2000s, suddenly in came Facebook, in came Twitter, in came Google. And it seemed like almost overnight, we had some of the most wealthy people in the world who figured out how to use old technology, now old, over 10 years old anyway, since the World Wide Web, and suddenly used it in an innovative way. So that's kind of also part of this idea, is taking an old idea and synthesizing it with new ideas. So the new idea in that case was implementation. We know what the technology can do. Now how do we use it in a way to benefit people, to make money off of it, however perspective you want to look at it. And that's part of the way the world progresses. It's taking the old technology, relatively, and blending it with new ideas and thinking outside the box in many cases, as was mentioned in the presentations. Again, this is all basically what Dr. Covey's talking about in this process that we're talking about right now. The idea of getting more information, of synthesizing ideas, synergizing, creating new ideas from it, and creating now with the mindset that we're going to find a win-win solution to it. And we're going to come up with something that's greater than either side came in with. That we had this person's ideas, or this organization's ideas. We had this organization's ideas, their concerns, their assets, these assets. Well, how can we combine all these things and come up with something new and exciting through synergy? So those are basically the three habits of interpersonal habits that Dr. Covey teaches. And he says, and this is important to understand, that the first three habits are foundational. Those are just how the inner victory calls them. But it's these second set of three, the interpersonal ones, that really leads to success. Ultimately, that guy who created the World Wide Web did very little interpersonally. The people that innovated figured out how to achieve success interpersonally. They figured out how to get people to use the technology that was created 10, 12, 13 years earlier in a way that people got excited about it. And so whether it was partly marketing, partly just how it was implemented, along came Facebook, and along came Google, and along came Twitter, and along came Wikipedia, and along came all these other things that have made the World Wide Web something really amazing, because they figured out how to do it. But it wasn't just figuring out how to do it. It was the interpersonal efforts that made it possible. It was figuring out marketing is interpersonal, finding people to come collaborate on making this work, interpersonal. Making sure that brainstorming within the people. You bring people together. You start brainstorming. What's the best idea? How can we make this work better? Interpersonal. And all the concepts that Covey teaches in this interpersonal section, the seek first to understand, then to be understood, seeking win-win, and synergizing, are what achieve the greatest successes in life. The first three habits were foundational. Being proactive, not accepting the status quo, being proactive, beginning with the end in mind, knowing what your ultimate goal is, what do you want to do, and putting first things first, managing your time. If you don't manage your time, you can't achieve success. As, again, my example is Dr. Covey himself. He had to manage his time with his 9 kids and with his jobs and with his studies and with his community service and his church service. He had to manage his time to write the book and to become one of the most influential people of the last century. Sometimes as we get into interpersonal relations, it doesn't work out the way that we anticipated. Ed finally puts his foot down around the house. One of my friends was a cartoonist. He made this one up for me. We've already listened to some of these the videos from Dr. Covey about empathetic listening. It goes beyond attentive listening. It goes beyond that, because now you're not just trying to listen to the words. You're trying to understand the feelings. You're trying to put yourself into their perspective. You're not looking at it from your perspective. You're now trying to look at it from their perspective. In one of I have another video. I don't think we'll have time to watch it during class, but I'm asking you to watch outside of class. It's a longer one, about 13 minutes. He goes through some of the process with the audience. And one of the ways he has them do it is he has them act as an interpreter. This is how what I'm saying and what I'm feeling, interpret this to everybody else. Because in a sense, that's what you're doing to yourself, doing for yourself if you're seeking first to understand. A good interpreter doesn't care about the exact words, they care about the exact meaning. And in some cases, the emotion behind it. One of the best interpreters I've ever seen was a friend of mine in Kazakhstan who would frequently interpret for me when I was giving speeches and stuff to non-English speakers. And first off, she was very quick. She was able to keep up with me. I think she could say it faster than I could. But one time I couldn't help but laugh. She was standing up there with somebody else, and this other person, another woman, had been in Kazakhstan for a couple of years, and she was just leaving Kazakhstan to go back to America. Had been there as a kind of a service volunteer, and she was talking, and the translator, my friend, the interpreter, was interpreting very quickly and very accurately, and then the woman that was speaking started to cry, and then my friend the interpreter started to cry, and we all started laughing because it was like she was interpreting her crying. But she really did, in a sense, she had to. That's what a good interpreter does, and that's what Dr. Covey shows in this video, the 13-minute video, is that in a very real way, as you're trying to understand what somebody else is saying, you're trying to be their interpreter to yourself. It may be only to yourself. You're trying to interpret what they're feeling, interpret what they're thinking, interpret what their concerns are, interpret what their goals are, and then implement it there in seeking a win-win solution. So as the previous video pointed out, it says actually there's 5 levels of listening, but these are the first 4. One is basically not listening, it's ignoring. One is pretending to listen. So you may pick up little pieces of it, but you're kind of thinking about what's going on, and so it's not really intentional ignoring, but it's pretty much you're kind of in your own world right then. You're not really paying much attention. Selective listening. Now you're kind of picking things up. A few things. Maybe some of you in this class are doing selective listening. You'll pick up a few ideas. Maybe, ideally, you make a few notes because if you were making notes here, it'd help you when you do your journal entries. But that's up to you. But while you're actually thinking about it, you may listen selectively for just things that have meaning to you. Or there's really attentive listening, where you're listening to every word, every idea. But then the next phrase, the 5th level, is the empathetic listening, where you're listening not only with your ears, but with your heart, with your mind, with your heart. You're trying to fully understand what they feel, not just what they are saying. You're probably trying to get past that into their mind, into their heart. A friend of mine threw these cartoons in this presentation. I'm not going to go into that. Here's the 13-minute one. I'm not going to listen to that here in class. And another one also, I think this is the one we did listen to already, 6-minute. Anyway, you can look at the cartoons later. Some are kind of stupid, but all related kind of to what we're talking about listening. And another one you can watch on Moodle. So I want to get into the practical application of this. I may have mentioned I had a consulting contract with the National Bank of Kazakhstan, specifically with one subsidiary, not really a branch of subsidiaries. It was a separate corporation, a subsidiary called the National Investment Corporation. And NIC was responsible for investing $80 billion of oil money from Kazakhstan They were forbidden, actually, from investing it within Kazakhstan. They had to invest the money outside of Kazakhstan. But while they were investing money outside of Kazakhstan and meeting CEOs and going around the world, they wanted my help to help them know how to communicate better, more effectively when they're at conferences, and even when they took somebody to dinner. What do we talk about? What do we, how do we more effective in our, their marketing? Part of the responsibility was to try to get some of these CEOs to invest in Kazakhstan. So they were supposed to invest their money outside. They're supposed to go find the best opportunities to invest their money in, the oil money, but then they're supposed to find people in other countries to come invest outside money, foreign money, into Kazakhstan. And so they had kind of two missions as they'd go out and have dinner with people or give presentations at conferences or listen to other people's presentations and talk to them after the conferences, things like that. They were thinking both, what should we invest our money in and how can we get them to come to Kazakhstan and invest their money. So I was helping them with, the ideas that they could develop, how to focus their ideas and be more effective in presenting their ideas, so forth. We ended up spending quite a bit of time talking about both Dr. Covey and how to implement his ideas into that process, and also Clayton Christensen, who we'll talk about later. So this is part of a slideshow that I created for the National Bank of Kazakhstan. Again, first off, starting with win-win and just reviewing how to approach people with the win-win mentality. We saw this slide last week, how you need to go in with integrity and with wanting to create win-win situations and wanting to be fair about things. You go in with maturity, being able to get into a situation, not become emotional about it, but to look at it, take a process like Dr. Covey has suggested and use that system and avoid confrontation, avoid the emotions and so forth, and to have the abundance mentality that there is enough for everybody, that we can afford to let other people win. We don't have to look for a win-lose situation. So I reviewed that with them, and then went into habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. This this idea, again, we've kind of already went through these details, but it is also shows the power of a paradigm. Once you understand how to be more effective in communicating with people by using this approach, by using empathetic listening, it is, as a slide we had early in the course, it can be quite an aha experience. Aha and paradigm shifting is very related, by the way. A paradigm shift is an aha experience. Maybe not all. In fact, I would say that most aha experiences are paradigm shifts. That's when suddenly you totally see something from a different perspective, and it's almost shocking to your system. We've already talked about the idea of looking at it like a doctor would. And indeed, there is about 30 years ago, I became acquainted. I was working at the time as a marketing director for an engineering consulting firm, a firm that would provide the design for construction projects as well as the construction engineering, oversee the construction, and so forth. My job was to get multi-million-dollar projects to work on. We would bid on projects like constructing, designing, and overseeing the construction of schools, prisons, things like that, laboratories, as well as other projects, highways, bridges, things like that too. But and so my job was to present put our best foot forward, show people why they should be taught, why they should interview our team as the best option. I won't go into my marketing, but one of the things that I became acquainted with at the time was the Mandeville marketing process. And it was basically somebody decided to take Covey's habits 4, 5, and 6, basically, and put them into a marketing perspective and a marketing system. And the idea was to approach marketing like a doctor. That you would go to a prospective client, and this, to do this fully, you'd need a big project. You need to have it be worth a lot of money to spend a lot of time on this. So you might go in and talk to somebody for 3 hours, and then go back out and brainstorm a solution and come back in with a proposal and spend more time with them. So this is not selling bubblegum. This is selling something big. This is a multi-million-dollar contract we'd be going after with this. Anyway, so it is using empathetic listening. It is using a win-win strategy in trying to help your clients to achieve success. So the idea is to go in and ask lots of questions. Find out everything you can. Find out what their key concerns are about whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. What are their goals, their key goals, their short-term goals, their long-term goals, their, as I said, their concerns about how it could fail, perhaps, and indeed, what this system teaches is that you should think of yourself like a doctor. That you're going to come in and diagnose their problem. You're going to come and find out everything you can about the problem at hand so you can address it and prescribe a solution to it. You come in and you set your agenda. Okay, what I want to do is, and act very professional. You take notes. That's part of your standard operating procedure. Just like my doctor sits down there with his computer. Some people might say, well, isn't that kind of rude? Well, to the contrary, if you go in to a doctor, you want him to take notes. And the same thing here is if they're saying, if this is an important project, they want you to take notes. Don't feel ashamed of taking notes. They want you to take notes. And some of the things you take notes of, besides just the basic information, strategically, you're looking for mystery words. A mystery word is a word that the people you're talking to use frequently to express themselves, because that mystery word has meaning to them. You need to understand what that meaning is, but regardless, you should be prepared when you come back with a proposal to use those mystery words. Because if it has meaning to them, it needs to have meaning to you. So as you're asking questions, you need to discover the meaning, why they're using this word over and over again. But if any words they use over and over again, you need to write down. Because when you come back with a proposal, you need to use those words. They have meaning. So you're attentive, you're organized, you ponder the answers, you let the client talk. In other words, you're just using Covey techniques, but in a professional setting. You ask, like I said, a lot of questions to find out all the basics, and then you go from there about their specific projects, their specific objectives, and so forth. You ask what their biggest challenges are. You ask what the biggest impediments are. You definitely need to know those, because your proposal needs to overcome those challenges and those impediments, those problems, those challenges. You need to find out what it is they expect from a consultant. What do they want? What's their biggest concern about hiring a consultant? What's their biggest desire for that consultant to do? What would be their mission within this project? When you're all done, you would do more or less what Covey is saying to do. They say, have we touched on everything you think is important to understand? Have you explained everything to me that I need to know before we can go ahead with this? And then let me summarize. And so you summarize what you've written down as the key points, the key concerns, the key challenges, the key impediments, everything that is important for your team to solve. Whether, again, this is in a bigger setting, but it's the same if you're one-on-one. What are all the objectives? What are the goals? What are the concerns? What are the impediments? What are the challenges? What do they want you to be able to do to help them? And as you summarize this for them, they will let them correct you, just like the real estate salesman did when he went in this last gasp effort to try to sell this property. am I understanding your concerns? Am I understanding what you want to accomplish? And at that time, they will clarify. If you're off limits, let them clarify. Listen again and correct your notes. Add to your notes, whatever you have to do. You want more information. And then in this case, where we're talking about big ticket items, a multi-million-dollar contract, now you say, well, what I'd like to do now is take this, go back to my team, go back to my experts, and come up with a proposal for you. Come back on a proposal on how to solve these problems, how to overcome these challenges, how to help you win, if you would, with this project. And so, and that's what you do. You go back and you brainstorm, and you come back with a proposal. You use those mystery words, but the main thing is that you're addressing their concerns, their objectives, their goals, their, addressing the problems, addressing the challenges, objecting the impediments, everything that they talked about of concern. Now you come back with a proposal to solve their problems. You are now the doctor prescribing the solution. And so, again, what this Mandeville approach has done is just taken Covey and put it into a sales situation, particularly with, again, with big ticket items in the engineering consulting field. If you're selling smaller ticket items, obviously you aren't going to take as much time. The technique is still good. How can I help you? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is it that you're trying to do? Trying to understand what they want. You can sell bubble gum that way, more or less, or something pretty cheap, clothing, something that's pretty cheap. A good salesperson could take the Covey approach. They're not going to go back and consult with a team to brainstorm, probably, but they could take the general approach with lesser time to help understand what the person wants and make recommendations of the clothing they might want to buy. What is this event for? What are your concerns about what kind of dress do you want? Is there, they might say, well, I have big hips. I want something that that kind of de-emphasizes my hips, or whatever it might be. My shoulders are narrow. I want something to help make my shoulders look broader. Try to find out what they want and find that for them. So it can be used for smaller ticket items. Ultimately, as I said, you are going back then. The idea is to go back and to synergize, taking the information. You are using the information they gave you, and now you're trying to synergize now with your team of experts if it's a big ticket item. And you are trying to brainstorm further. I guess the next step would be to take your proposal back and brainstorm with the potential client. This is our solution. What do you think? How can we, and then initiate brainstorming with the client after you've already brainstormed with your experts. So this has been shown to be an extremely effective way of actual marketing. Let me go back to, I skipped over a slide here, but I've used this myself also. When I was 25, yeah, that's right. When I was 25, I bought my first newspaper. I'd already been an editor of a big city newspaper. In this case, I bought a small town newspaper because that's all I could afford. In fact, I negotiated to pay nothing down and make monthly payments. So that's all I could afford. I didn't have any money to put down. So I was able to make a good deal with the former publisher. But then what I found was, as I went out to try to sell advertising, which is, again, the way newspapers make a living in America with advertising, I felt like I was begging because I felt like people really did not think the advertising would do them any good. And that indeed they were considering me a charity because they wanted a local newspaper. They wanted a local newspaper, and so they knew to have a local newspaper they had to buy advertising. So they did it for charitable reasons. They bought advertising from me. This was somewhat disturbing to me. I did not want to be seen as a charity. I wanted to be of service to them. I wanted them to consider the advertising of value. And so I pondered a lot about this, and I talked to them, and I also started doing some study and separately, and I think it was an audio tape. I think it might have been, or I don't remember whether I read it or heard it. This was now 40 years ago, a little more than 40 years ago, when this was happening, and anyway, I became aware of a case study anyway, whether it was how I did, I don't even remember, but about an insurance salesperson in Georgia who for years he lived in a community of about that, well, they had a newspaper with 20,000 circulation. I know that. I remember that much. How big this city was, I'm not exactly sure, but their newspaper had 20,000 circulation. And he had advertised in the newspaper before, and he never felt like it did much good for his business. It's kind of hard to measure the results of advertising for anybody, but especially for somebody in insurance, because you typically, when you sell insurance, it's like a person buys insurance maybe once in a lifetime in some cases. I mean, they go to one person, they buy insurance from one company, typically, and they make that decision once every many years. On average, maybe once every 5 years, they might change insurance providers. Some people stay a lot longer than that with their insurance providers. So every 5 to 10 years, somebody might consider changing insurance providers. So it's a hard sell. So if you're advertising to people to come let you bid on their work, you don't expect a lot of response to your advertising for something like insurance. But nonetheless, you would expect some response. So he put ads in this paper, and he got just a little bit of response. So it was hard for him to calculate the usefulness of the advertising. He kind of thought it was like, it pays for itself, hopefully. It pays for itself, maybe. And that's the best he could hope for. And so he didn't advertise very much. He advertised maybe once every couple of months, maybe once every 3 months, something like that. Not very often. And not very big ads. And he consequently didn't get very much in return for it. But that was also the same attitude that my advertisers had at my newspaper. So that's why I was reading this with interest and thinking about this with interest. Well, this insurance man in Georgia decided he would try selling nationally. He would not just sell locally, but that he had a certain product that he thought he might be able to sell to people across the whole United States. And so he ordered a national mailing list. This was before the World Wide Web, and so he was just going to send it out by postal mail. And so he went to the newspaper to have them just print some flyers for him to mail out to people around the country. And so they printed up his flyer, and he hadn't received his mailing list yet. And so he was waiting for that mailing list, and the newspaper called him and said, we have your flyers printed. Would you please come pick them up? We don't have room for them here. And the guy said, well, I don't have any place to put them. I'm waiting for my mailing list. And they said, well, that can't be our problem. You can rent some space or whatever, but you really have to get your flyers out of here. And so the insurance man finally said, well, look, I printed 40,000. You have 20,000 circulation. Put 20,000 in your newspaper, and then just keep them for another week, and I'll have my mailing list by then. So the newspaper agreed. So they inserted the flyers into the newspaper, sent it out to their 20,000 circulation. And just like before, the insurance man got a few phone calls, nothing much. Hopefully it paid for itself. But then he still didn't receive his mailing list. So the publisher called him again and said, you have to come get your other flyers. You promised to come get them this week. And the guy said, well, I still don't have my mailing list. I tell you what, just put them in the newspaper. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why I don't have the mailing list. Just put the same flyers in the same newspaper, send them to the same people. I know it won't do any good. I'm just wasting my money, but I don't have the mailing labels, and I have no place to put the flyers. Just put them in the newspaper again, and I'll reprint when I get the mailing labels. He was very frustrated. So the publisher put the same flyers into the same newspaper to the same people, and what happened? the phone rang off the hook. He had better results than he ever had in his whole life. Now, there's lots of background, and if you were to take a communications class from me, I'd explain all the reasons why that worked. But the bottom line with advertising is you have to campaign. Can you imagine a candidate for president of this country or any country running one ad and expecting to win? They're not that stupid, right? Politicians know you have to run a campaign. But for some reason, advertisers don't know that. They haven't figured that out. Small advertisers haven't figured out that you have to have a campaign to make it work. And so they think that they can put in an ad once every 3 months and that it's going to do as much good as if they put it in every week, that there's not going to be any difference. And so they just think that way. And one of the main things that a publisher has to do is help them to understand advertising doesn't work that way. That advertising has to be part of a campaign to be very effective. So I started thinking about this problem. Started thinking about the attitude of my advertisers, how they thought they were just doing a charity to me, how I could really help them if they would understand the idea of a campaign. I was convinced I could help them with that. But how did I get them even to think about it? How could I get them? They would just think I was looking out for myself if I just went in and tried to sell them a weekly ad. And so I came up with this. I came up with a proposal for a year-long contract. And most of them were running small ads. Their ads were typically about 1/8 of a page of a broadsheet. A broadsheet is the big size newspaper, like that. Big size newspaper, twice the size of a tabloid, 4 times the size of a letter size paper. So they were basically buying a 1/8 page ad once in a while from me. Not every week, but once in a while they'd buy a 1/8 page ad. And so I came to him and said, look, if you will contract with me to pay me the equivalent of a 1/8 page ad every week for the entire year, this is what I'll give you. 4 times a year, instead of an 1/8 page ad, I will give you a full page ad. 4 times a year, instead of a 1/8 page ad, I'll give you a half page ad. 4 times a year, instead of an 1/8 page ad, I will give you a quarter page ad. And all the other weeks, I'll give you your 1/8 page ad, just like you've been buying in the past. And I'll give you some classified ads and some streamers as well. Well, this got them interested. I felt like I was offering them a win-win situation. Now, part of this is a base because I understood my own industry. I understood that the biggest cost of putting out a publication is not the paper and ink. It's the manpower. It's the time that you take to sell, to do stuff. And so the actual paper and ink is not very expensive. And so based on that knowledge, I could offer them a full page ad. It really wasn't costing me that much. So in thinking outside the box and thinking about win-win, I decided that I could offer them this combination. And in so doing, they now had to think about campaigning, because now they're going to have an ad every week. Now they're going to have full page ads 4 times a year. Now they're going to have half page ads 4 times a year. Now they're going to have quarter page ads 4 times a year. What would they do with that campaign? And so now it forced them to consider the power of the actual campaign, and it allowed me no longer to waste my time selling, but rather to service. So now I could come to them and help them with their advertising. I knew I was going to pick up an ad because they had signed a contract. They were going to get charged one way or the other. But now I could come, look at their ad, make suggestions, help them to do better with their advertising. Well, this worked. In fact, in 1 year, I doubled my advertising revenue in 1 year. I actually owned the newspaper for 2 years because it really wasn't what I wanted to do long term. It was kind of a limited, like I said, it was a small town and so forth. But I was able to sell it for a really good profit, go take that money and go pay for my master's degree and buy a house and do lots of stuff I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But it was based on this idea of basically implementing Covey ideas, although Covey hadn't written his book yet, in looking for a win-win situation, understanding where they were coming from, and trying to figure out how I could service them better and still get what I needed, which was more consistent, less time, wasting less time selling, spending more time servicing, being of value to them as they gave me a steady income and increased my overall income in the process. So using this, I said, was one of the most important things I did in my entire career, was understanding this approach and, at a relatively young age, becoming a very successful newspaper publisher. Later, because I was a successful newspaper publisher then I was hired to be a publisher of multiple newspapers and built my career from that. And I also then later, when I wanted to take some time off to have more time with my kids, I went into PR marketing, and I was more successful in PR marketing as well because as a publisher, I had learned how to market. I had learned how to approach people with win-win solutions. So this is my illustration, basically, of why Covey's concepts are important. This is one way that you could implement it in your own lives, is you can come up with these situations where whatever your field is, you can come up with a situation where you have to negotiate with somebody. And you can come up with these win-win situations that will benefit them, benefit you. But it begins with understanding. Again, our Team 3 presented some of that. Whether it's critical thinking or synthetic thinking, if you could call it that, creative thinking, you have to begin with an understanding, the fundamental understanding. You need to know that you have the best information to go from. I had to understand that my paper and ink was not the biggest cost. I could afford to increase my newspaper by a couple of pages every week if I just got a few more advertisers. And it would make my paper look bigger. It would be better overall. My subscribers would think of me better. But now I was sending them a bigger newspaper, and that included advertising, more advertising obviously, but people actually appreciate advertising. They use advertising. And it would include more news as well because I had more pages. So it was win-win for everybody. Okay, well, that's the essence of Dr. Covey's fifth habit, and at least one way that you could apply it. In your journals, you can think about your own careers, your own future careers, and think about how you can apply this in your future. Again, some of it is not in a career setting. Some of it is in your personal life, how you would deal with your spouse, how you deal with your children. But some of it will be useful in your career as well. I've actually included on the website some videos about sales. My rationale is that everybody is a salesperson. Someday you all have to sell. That doesn't mean you sell a product or service. In a way, a service, your own services. As a prospective employee, you're selling yourself. That's important to understand. You are a salesperson. When you sell yourself to your future spouse, you are a salesperson. When you have an idea that you want to share with your boss, you become a salesperson. Whatever field you're in, you will be in sales if you're going to be successful. If you're not a good salesperson, you will not be successful. Almost by definition, you will not be successful if you don't understand sales. And so I'm having you watch a series of really short. All of them are less than 3 minutes long, I think. Maybe one's 4 minutes. I don't remember. But a series of short, altogether about maybe 30 minutes of how an expert in sales uses some of these approaches in his sales. Asking questions, particularly asking questions, is the key to his sales. So almost all the videos that I've combined under that portion have to do with asking questions. How to use questions to get to the information you want and to be able to sell what you want. Okay, well, have a good break. I will be putting up today a participation quiz. I'll actually give you 3 weeks, I think it is, to do it. But it's good to do it while it's fresh in your mind, if you can. If not, you can review what's on Moodle and do your participation quiz later. And again, you should know that the questions that will be in your quarterly quiz will all come from the participation quizzes. I don't give you the answers on purpose because I don't want you just memorizing answers. I want you to figure out the answers, find the answers, and so you will know what your grade is on your participation quizzes.